Hello, you're watching A News. I'm Dilek Tuna. Let's see the headlines. The US says it's preparing the toughest sanctions ever imposed on Iran, further escalating its economic pressure campaign. Venezuelan and Cuban migrants deported from the US have arrived in Liberia under a new agreement with Washington. And European leaders are demanding Israel halt its controversial E1 settlement project. Washington says it's preparing its toughest ever sanctions against Iran following President Trump's threat of economic warfare. The move comes as oil prices rise and Tehran disputes US claims over shipping through the Strait of Hormuz.
US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says Washington will impose what he described as the toughest sanctions in history on Iran. He says maximum economic pressure could reduce the need for further major military action. Speaking to CNBC on Thursday, Bessent said the measures would complement the US naval blockade imposed on Iran in April. He said details of the sanctions package would be announced at a news conference on Monday. The comments followed President Donald Trump's threat of economic warfare against Iran and countries that provide Tehran with any form of support. Trump defended the policy, saying preventing Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons was the central aim of the operation. Oil prices rose to their highest level in more than 3 weeks after the US warnings, as markets assess the impact of the conflict on Middle Eastern oil supplies. Washington says the measures are intended to weaken Iran's government. Tehran, however, has accused the US of spreading misinformation about shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's state news agency IRNA says traffic through the waterway remains limited and is restricted to routes controlled by Tehran. It also accused Washington of trying to ease pressure on global crude prices and US petrol prices ahead of the midterm elections. Meanwhile, Russia's UN ambassador Vasily Nebenzia says Moscow will not pressure Iran to resume negotiations with Washington. He says Tehran should decide its own course as a sovereign state.
Iran has condemned what it calls an escalation in US economic and trade sanctions, vowing to stand firm in defending its interests. Turaj Shirililiu reports from Tehran.
Iran's foreign ministry has condemned the latest US economic and trade sanctions against Tehran, describing the measures as economic terrorism and crimes against humanity. In a statement, the ministry said Iran remains determined to protect its national security and interests, despite what it called continued US military, economic, political, and psychological pressure. Tehran also linked the new sanctions to the anniversary of the 1953 CIA-backed coup in Iran, saying they reflect decades of hostility by successive US administrations. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi separately criticized the measures on X, responding to US President Donald Trump's description of the sanctions as an economic D-Day. Araghchi said Washington's continued reliance on what he called failed pressure policies would only lead to further defeat and deepen tensions with the Iranian people. He also warned that US economic measures against Iran threaten the global economy and national sovereignty worldwide. Turaj Shirililiu from Tehran for A News.
Washington isn't just hitting Iran with sanctions, it has also announced fresh measures against Hezbollah, the armed group based in Lebanon.
The United States has imposed fresh sanctions on Hezbollah, accusing the Lebanese group of acting on behalf of Iran's government and its Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The US Treasury Department also sanctioned 10 people accused of moving large sums of cash for Hezbollah. Washington says a Turkey-based businessman ran a network using exchange houses, companies, and bank accounts to transfer money between countries in the region and Hezbollah's stronghold in Lebanon. The latest measures allow the US to freeze assets and restrict financial transactions involving those targeted. Washington first designated Hezbollah as a foreign terrorist organization in 1997 and has maintained sanctions against the group since then. The move comes as the Trump administration has threatened tougher economic action against Iran and other countries accused of supporting it. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says he will announce next week what he described as the toughest sanctions in history planned for Iran. Hezbollah has long-standing military and political ties with Iran. Lebanon's government has been pushing for the group to disarm, saying decisions on war and peace should rest with the state.
International concern is growing over the impact of settlement expansion on peace efforts as Gaza continues to face a severe humanitarian crisis, with millions remaining in urgent need for shelter and basic aid.
Israel's plans to open tenders for about 1,200 settlement homes in the strategically important E1 area of the occupied West Bank have drawn fresh condemnation from major Western powers. The UK, France, Germany, Italy and Canada called the decision unacceptable and urged Israel to withdraw the plans immediately. The 5 countries said the move could further undermine hopes for a two-state solution. E1 lies east of Jerusalem, and Palestinians and many of Israel's allies have warned that construction there could effectively cut the West Bank in two and isolate East Jerusalem. US Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee has warned Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank not to take property owned by Palestinian Americans.
And I think if we're going to be true to faith, true to heritage, then you recognize that if you don't own something, you don't take it and you don't desire it. So if someone owns the land and they own their house, then having someone come and take it over and scare the family away from it, that's a violation not just of man's law, that's a violation of God's law, and it should be called out as such.
The United Nations has also warned that the plan poses an existential threat to the territorial continuity of a future Palestinian state. In Gaza, the UN says Palestinian civilians, including children, continue to be killed and injured in Israeli airstrikes. UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric said the bodies of 50 people, including 19 children, killed more than 2 years ago, were recently recovered from the rubble and buried.
Our colleagues at the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs continue to receive reports of Palestinian civilians in Gaza being killed, being injured, or otherwise impacted by Israeli airstrikes, by shelling and gunfire. This includes children, as one can imagine, given the overcrowded conditions in the Gaza Strip. We continue to call for the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure. Civilians should never be targeted or used for military purposes.
The UN says recovery work is being slowed by restrictions on machinery and supplies, while 94% of Gaza's 2.1 million people need shelter and basic assistance.
Tensions between Israel and Turkey are escalating over the future of Syria after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confirmed that Israel struck the Abu al-Duhur airbase to send what he described as a clear message to Ankara. Netanyahu says Israel will not tolerate a Turkish military presence moving further south in Syria because it regards that as a security threat. Joining me now is Melih Demirtas, political analyst and former diplomat from Ankara, Turkey. Melih, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Ms. Tuna, for having me.
Now, Melih, is Israel genuinely worried about Turkey's expanding role in Syria, or are they billing Turkey as a new enemy for domestic politics and regional purposes?
Yes, the good question, and this may be a very important question. We must ask, first of all, what is the general picture? It is about Syria, it is about this changing picture in these last 3 years. It is about Palestine, Iran, or maybe we can think about this general sum or general picture is all affecting maybe this structure, this tension. Especially these questions arise, first of all, because of this Israel's aggressiveness. We have many states, such states in the history, I think, who really can show such an aggressiveness, such a belligerency, so openly, quote unquote, in a so brave way. But I think Israel's braveness is also linked with some other actors. First of all, I think United States must not be skipped. We can say in coordination with some new attacks or new plans from Mr. Trump to Iran, I think some other new plans also arises now from the side of Israel. Just Mr. Netanyahu, I think it's just 2 days ago in the night show, said very openly that they have some plans in a very, not a small picture of Israel. I think they have, a very, big picture of what they call, quote unquote. In this big picture, they can even come like 70, 50 kilometers just near to the Turkish border. The new Syrian regime's borders. And we can see that this is an escalation, yes, but Turkey is always on the side of diplomacy, on the side of, this calm and very stable relations with all the actors. Even it is the regime of Mr. Netanyahu's far-rightist cabinet, we still seek way, we still really searching some ways of talking still, after all these genocides, after all this maybe belligerency, after all the maybe, as you maybe also mentioned in your previous, bulletins section, that all the European powers now, the Western powers, just blaming Israel for the actions. Just the next target will be maybe this Syrian territories. Both southern and now the northern Syrian sections of territory. But I think we can still find a way to escape this picture, because this picture can mean some destruction for some territories. I don't know, it could have, some effects on this geography. We can see that Turkey is always an active player of this geography in both diplomatic and the military sense. But I think in these upcoming elections, Mr. Netanyahu, his far-rightist coalition members can really search all the ways to provoke and to propaganda, maybe diplomatic ways, like some actors, as I said, from the Roman times to Nazi, Germany. We have so many actors who can really gain some provocative and propaganda ways, like Israel does, in these days.
Now, Mehdi, Turkey's defense ministry says there was no Turkish military delegation at Abu al-Duhur before or during the Israeli attack, and says activity there concerned Syria's stability and reconstruction. Now, Syria also says it had assured Israel there would be no permanent Turkish base. So is Israel acting on intelligence, Ankara and Damascus dispute, or defining its own red lines inside Syria here?
First of all, we must ask, should we guarantee or should we give some guarantees to an actor who are hundreds of kilometers away from us, from Syria and Turkey and Israel? It can make any bombardments, any attacks, any aggressiveness to southern Syria, Lebanon, any country. It can really have a relation to its quote-unquote security or national interest. And now it can come to like 50, as I said, kilometers just near to Turkish border. And if there is an agreement between two important countries, Turkey and Syria, which has, first of all, we must underline, about 900 kilometers, common border between themselves, Turkey and Syria. Of course, we can have some chats, some talking, some diplomatic arrangements, some delegations in military, intelligence, diplomatic, tradesmen. I think about Israel. How many countries Israel have now its coalition? Think about Turkey, Azerbaijan, Caucasia, Central Asia, from Asia to America, Russia, Latin America. Thousands of kilometers we have seen these Israel linkages about coalitions. Now, of course, we can see that some delegations can come and can go and can talk, or Turkish Defense Ministry, of course, Intelligence and Foreign Ministry said the official declarations. But again, that doesn't give any right to think that Israel is the big brother, of this region. No, it is not a big brother. We must not forget that. Israel is only founded in 1948, in 49, just 1 year later, the first Muslim nation again. Who gives the credit, who gives the recognition is Turkey. Maybe we must think again this, how Israel is created, how Israel is established, and how we can come today, just 8 years later, and how Israel is created as like a new Leviathan, maybe postmodern Leviathan now in our region.
Okay, Mehdi, you said earlier that the United States was pretty much the only country left that was, supporting, if you like, for lack of a better word, Israel's brashness, boldness, belligerence. That was a specific word you used. And Israel didn't just issue a warning, it bombed the airbase, but the United States called that an unnecessary escalation, despite them being on the Israeli side. The US being their strongest ally, how unusual is it for Washington to criticize this action in Syria this openly, and should Ankara take anything from that?
You must understand that United States diplomacy is sometimes skillful, sometimes so simple diplomacy. It can really play a very good cop, bad cop strategy always. We can see very good diplomats. We can see sometimes very simple diplomats in United States corridors. And sometimes they really say some things very openly. For example, our ambassador, in Turkey, also special representative in Syria, Tom Barak, said that I think Turkey could have given some, scaled, a limited response to Israel. What does it mean? We do not understand that Mr. Barak's maybe declarations that, first of all, he equalizes always these powers, Israel and Turkey. Maybe two, bloc strategy, two, rivalry strategy. If United States want to see some actors who can really compete, who can really be rivals inside a narrow region, like the Middle East, like Eurasia, it is not the, suitable days. It is not a very appropriate times for talking this. Think about Iranian, think about Palestinian issues, think about very, also tensive atmosphere in Russia, Ukraine, even on Caucasia or Turkic brothers. So we can say that United States seeking something, we know that, but we do not still name it. We do not still can have a limit what United States can do the other day. It is like Mr. Trump's strategy. He can see something, say something one day and the other day very, the directly opposite he can do, like the Iranian case we see in the last 6 months. Now, we still trust them. United States, of course, partners, but that doesn't change that they really had an important connection, an important partnership, as I said, in these last 80 years with Israel, especially Israel, and how, again, created this Israeli reality. We must ask again what United States aims, especially in this region.
Mehdi, could Turkey want a permanent base in Syria, and could it alter its plans after these strikes?
Syria is an important country, Ms. Tuna. Syria is not the country of this new regime in these last 2 years. Of course, the Assad regime is really ruined. It's really made a catastrophic devastation, in this country for more than 50 years. We can see the Cold War years. But Syria is also an entity, a territory of this thousands of years of combination, amalgamation we see, of these Christians, Muslims, of course, Jewish populations. And Syria is also us. Think about our population in eastern, southeastern, especially of Turkey. Think about the relatives, think about the connections, families, the commercial relations of Turkey and Syria, and this new regime who really wants some support from all actors, from, of course, Turkey, from Azerbaijan, from Europe. How many times Mr. Shara and Mr. Trump, has make a meeting, since this establishment of the new regime, many meetings we had. And now Mr. Shaibani, the foreign minister, active foreign minister, saying this. They really seeking something, some support from all the countries, even with Israel. They have some, connections, diplomatic talks, we know that. And we do not oppose it. But we do not also understand that why Israel is so belligerent to all, attempts for diplomatic and positive attempts. There can be some basis. There can be some military or intelligence or, as I said, commercial relations with all the countries, Turkey, Syria. Once we had, between Turkey and Israel, think about this establishment process of Israel. As I said, how positive relations we had with Israel for many years. And now, of course, we can have some rights for having some independent, it is important, independent relations with other countries, including Syria.
Mehdi, going back to Netanyahu's statements, former Defense Minister and IDF Chief Moshe Ya'alon has also accused Netanyahu of deliberately fueling tensions with Turkey and trying to open another front, as we were saying earlier. Why would someone with Ya'alon's security credentials believe Netanyahu's approach is making Israel less rather than more secure?
Again, political theory or diplomatic maybe talkings. There's good and bad cops always standing there. Sometimes one actor always seems to be so radicalized, marginalized in this picture, of course, Mr. Netanyahu. But of these pictures, of course, there's far-rightist members like Katz or this Ben-Gvir, such names we have, of course, in Israel now. But the upcoming elections all affecting, I think, the picture, Ms. Tuna, because the Israel said, one of the most maybe critical of its elections in this recent history, in 2 or 3 months. And we will see such names can appear, especially in bureaucracy, as you said, in military, in intelligence, also in political parties. It will change something in Israel. I have some question marks, but still I believe the democracy. I believe the consciences in the inside of these people, of this Israeli intelligence, Israeli intellectuals especially. But it will change the picture. Again, I will have some question marks. But still, we need some conscience. We need some really diplomatic ways. At least we hope that with the help of maybe United States, also Russia, and possibly China, or also with our brother country, Azerbaijan, we can have some moderate policies with, I think, this belligerent actor, Israel.
Okay. Now, you say you want to believe in the logic or in the consciousness of people inside Israel, but Netanyahu's Likud, and I think most of us are in the same boat, Netanyahu's Likud campaign has displayed Erdogan on election billboards alongside Iran's supreme leader and Hezbollah's leader, figures presented to voters as external threats. And they call them terrorist genocidal entities or bodies, if you like. Is Turkey now being incorporated into Netanyahu's domestic election narrative as Israel's next major rival? And is this going to wash in Israel?
Turkey cannot be the rival, of Israel in the sense of like two equal rivals. Israel is a creation of some important great powers. You must understand that. It is, it has been made in nuclear power. First of all, we must not forget that Israel has a capacity of this nuclear power, unfortunate weapons. As I said, United States must not be skipped in this general picture. Always in these 80 years of human history, we see that the general picture of this war game radically changed. I really want to give maybe not appropriate example, but I always want to give some such examples that maybe you watch this this summer's movie, Odysseus. It is the famous American movie, of course, this summer. And I always believe that this cultural diplomacy or cinema track of America always gives the right message. Even the American official line makes this radical or marginal maybe politics in sometimes. In this cinematic example, the last message is so clear. The war, the change of this nature of war, the change of the rules of war, maybe rules of humanity, also change us. Things about this Trojan War. And really, Israel changed this nature of war. Israel changed game of this nature, also even this ethics. And because of this, it cannot maybe have a return to this nature of this maybe ethics, nature of this even Judaism. Because all this religion, all this maybe in Muslims, in Judaism or Christian philosophy, we know that such rivalries must have an end. But now, on the upcoming elections, as you said, maybe the next target can be Iran and maybe Turkey. I don't know. Some other actors can be chosen in the maybe next elections. Because for such actors, for such countries, you must be always careful because they are really tend to always change, as I said, the nature of these wars, the nature of these relations between humanity. And we hope again that some really people who have conscience can win in these elections, both in the United States and also Israel.
Mehdi, thank you so much for joining us on the program and for your analysis today. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, Mr.
After the break, 13 people are killed and dozens injured in Kyiv amid a massive Russian missile attack on Ukraine's capital. Stay with us on A News. Welcome back. You're watching A News. Romania has detected an explosives-laden drone near a major energy project in the Black Sea. The drone was spotted just 100 meters from the Neptune deep gas project, prompting Romania to scramble F-16 fighter jets. Romania has not identified the drone's origin, but accusations have been directed at Russia over the incident.
Welcome to this day in Europe, where Romania destroyed an explosive-laden marine drone close to one of the EU's most important new energy projects. Romania scrambled 2 F-16 fighter jets after the drone was spotted just 100 meters from the Neptune deep gas project in the Black Sea. The site lies within Romania's exclusive economic zone, but outside its territorial waters, meaning an attack there would not automatically fall within NATO's collective defense provisions. Defense Minister Radu Miruța says the drone was hit by a fighter jet, then completely destroyed by a ship sent to the area. He later confirmed it was carrying explosives. Now, this is not an isolated incident. Earlier this month, Romanian military divers destroyed 2 other drones drifting near the project. And just days ago, 2 Spanish F-18 fighter jets shot down a drone that entered Romanian airspace, following 3 Russian drones shot down on 3 consecutive days in July. Romania has not identified where the latest drone came from, but Ukraine says it was not theirs, and the Romanian president blames Russia, condemning what he calls an intensification of irresponsible incidents by Moscow. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the latest incident is part of an escalating campaign of threats. Russia has not commented. The location also matters. Neptune Deep is expected to begin producing gas next year and could make Romania the EU's largest gas producer. Jointly owned by OMV Petrom and state-owned Romgaz, the project is an important part of Europe's efforts to strengthen its energy security. Miruța says Romania is on the front line of the EU's defense, facing threats not only from drones at sea and in the air, but also from floating mines in the Black Sea. Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey are working closely together to clear those mines, with more than 150 neutralized since the war in Ukraine started. For Romania and its NATO allies, the war is increasingly posing a threat not only to their airspace and waters, but also to critical energy infrastructure. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
At least 2 people have been killed and 2 others injured in a Russian drone attack on Ukraine's Kharkiv region. The overnight strike hit the village of Lebasye, where 5 homes and several cars were damaged and fires broke out. Rescuers recovered the bodies of 2 women from the rubble. Russian strikes also hit the Sumy region, causing fires, damage to residential areas and further injuries. The Ukrainian drone attack has reportedly damaged an industrial facility in Russia's Perm region, home to a major oil refinery. Local authorities said air defences responded early Friday. The extent of the damage remains unverified. The refinery, more than 1,500 kilometres from Ukraine, has been targeted in previous attacks. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is calling on the US and other allies to approve the sale of Patriot interceptors after a deadly Russian missile and drone attack on Kyiv.
The strike was a combined one, and there were a lot of ballistics, cruise missiles, drones. Unfortunately, ballistics are the most difficult now to intercept. Whether the percentage of interception of cruise missiles is close to 90%, the situation with ballistic missiles is much worse. We need interceptors for Patriots. This is something only our partners can provide. On all levels, we convey to them our needs and our understanding that they have the resources to meet them.
Latvia and Lithuania are stepping up efforts to counter what they see as growing Russian hybrid threats, from arson to migrant networks. Latvia's Prime Minister says recent incidents form part of Russia's hybrid warfare against countries backing Ukraine, while Estonia is probing a possible Russian role in an arson attack linked to Milrum Robotics. Meanwhile, Lithuania has logged about 1,900 cases of secondary migration this year, with Latvia's Operation Werewolf targeting migrant smuggling networks. And Russia is facing a growing fuel crisis after a sustained Ukrainian drone campaign targeted its oil infrastructure. Petrol was available at just 28% of Russian filling stations on Thursday, with queues appearing in Moscow for the first time. Authorities have imposed fuel limits across much of the country, while major stations have capped purchases. Russia has also brought back lower-grade fuel to ease shortages as the Kremlin faces mounting pressure over the impact on its energy supplies. And staying in Russia, the country sees little prospect of progress toward a peaceful settlement of the Ukraine conflict under Kyiv's current position. That's according to Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov. He says US envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are always welcome in Russia, but no dates are set for any visit.
At the moment, given the position of the Kyiv regime, there are no grounds for optimism regarding a peaceful settlement. The developments on the front lines are well known. The special military operation continues, "We highly value the efforts of all countries that are sincerely seeking to contribute to the settlement process."
And over to Latin America. Heavy rain has triggered mudslides and rockfalls in Peru. As a result, dozens of vehicles and passengers have been stranded on a coastal highway in the south of the country for a fourth day. The landslides damaged parts of the Pan American Highway South, bringing traffic in both directions to a standstill. Road links between cities have been cut, with trucks, buses and cars stranded along a stretch of around 10 kilometres. Some trucks are carrying fish, chicken, fruit and vegetables, which has started to spoil. Municipal workers are distributing food to drivers and passengers. Soldiers are also helping to clear mud from the road. Authorities have not yet said when the highway will reopen. And Chile's president has visited the city of Tocopilla after floods and mudslides caused major damage. Around 60% of homes in the city were affected. More than 1,000 people have been moved to shelters across the region. Army and Navy personnel are clearing streets of mud and debris. Volunteers are also helping with the cleanup. Authorities say there have been no deaths or missing people. However, the warning system failed to issue timely alerts as water levels in the ravines rose rapidly. Tocopilla is located on a narrow coastal strip surrounded by ravines. And a landslide at a gold mine in southwestern Colombia has killed 13 workers and injured 7 others. The collapse happened on Wednesday. Authorities initially suspected an explosion, but later said mining activity destabilised the slope. Rescue teams worked through the night to recover the victims, with all those reported missing found by early Thursday. Deadly accidents are common at unlicensed mines in Colombia. The fallout from the mass crossing into the Spanish enclave of Ceuta is influencing Europe's long-awaited partnership with Morocco. Brussels is now reportedly preparing more support for border management as it seeks to conclude a partnership deal by the end of the year.
The Ceuta crisis has strengthened Morocco's hand in its negotiations with the European Union. According to Euronews, Brussels is preparing to increase resources for security, migration and border management as it works towards a new strategic partnership with Rabat. EU officials reportedly denied that the Ceuta crisis accelerated negotiations. They say the agreement, which is largely about migration, was already expected by the end of this year. But they acknowledge migration surge has prompted Brussels to increase resources dedicated to border and migration management. A European Commission spokesperson told Euronews that the EU committed €222 million for migration management in Morocco between 2021 and 2024, with another €190 million foreseen through 2027. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has also called for tighter checks, physical barriers and improved technical and financial support for Morocco. The Ceuta crisis came after more than 72,000 people crossed into the Spanish enclave irregularly at the end of July. Dozens of people were killed. Meanwhile, Spain is building temporary accommodation in Ceuta, with 4 sites planned to provide space for up to 1,500 people as existing reception centres struggle with overcrowding.
The Trump administration has sent the first group of deportees to Liberia under a deal allowing Washington to transfer up to 1,200 people to the West African country over the next year. Liberia's information minister said most of those deported are from Latin American countries, including Venezuela, Cuba and Colombia. The arrangement is part of the Trump administration's efforts to speed up deportations by sending some people to third countries. The UN Refugee Agency and migration officials are helping provide support. Washington says the deals are lawful, while critics question the treatment of deportees. Victims of a boat disaster in Nigeria have been buried. At least 50 people, most of them children, were killed. It happened in the Goronyo area of Sokoto State. The bodies were taken to a local mosque ahead of the burial. Ahead, residents said the boat was carrying farmers and workers travelling to harvest rice. There are different accounts of how many people were on board. One resident said there were more than 70, while another put the number at 57. Boat accidents are common in Nigeria, especially during the rainy season. After the break, we'll look at more stories shaping the region. Welcome back. You're watching A News. The Armenian government has approved its development program for the next 5 years. The document includes concrete plans for signing a peace agreement with Azerbaijan, delimiting the border and developing transport links. At the same time, Yerevan plans to modernise its armed forces and strengthen its military capabilities in the coming years.
Armenia's new 5-year development program places particular emphasis on relations with Azerbaijan. The document says work will continue towards signing and ratifying a peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, as well as the delimitation and demarcation of the state border. It also plans to expand ties between the two countries' civil societies and business communities, as well as bilateral trade. Regional transport projects are also highlighted in the program. Armenia plans to implement the Crossroads of Peace initiative and rebuild the Gyumri-Akurik and Yeresk-Sadarak railway sections. The document also calls for greater dialogue with Azerbaijan and Turkey in the energy sector. At the same time, the Armenian government has identified the development of its armed forces as another priority for the next 5 years. The program calls for continued efforts to transition to a professional army, increase the number of military personnel, and strengthen the armed forces' supply of weapons, military equipment, and other resources. It also envisages the digital transformation of the military command and control system, aligning military education institutions with Western standards and expanding domestic military production. In foreign policy, Armenia plans to deepen its strategic partnerships with the European Union and the United States, while transforming its relationship with Russia in line with a new foreign policy context. The program also includes plans to draft a new constitution and put it to a referendum. Overall, the document shows that Armenia plans to pursue peace and regional integration with Azerbaijan while simultaneously strengthening its defense capabilities over the next 5 years.
And joining me now to discuss the Armenian government's program for 2026 to 2031 is Elmira Talibzadeh, political analyst from Baku, Azerbaijan. Elmira, welcome to the program.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Now, this new program doesn't just refer broadly to peaceful relations. It specifically commits Armenia to signing and ratifying the peace agreement with Azerbaijan and also continuing border delimitation and demarcation. Now, how important is it that these commitments are now embedded in the government's 5-year agenda?
Thank you for the question. That's very important because for the first time, the Armenian government is formally trying to build its development strategy around the notion that the region environment has fundamentally changed and the Armenia must adapt to this new reality rather than continue organizing its politics around the old conflict. So I think the central idea is straight. Armenia wants to move from being a state whose economy, also security and political identity were heavily shaped by the conflict and the isolation, to a state whose development is based on peace, is based on some connectivity issues, infrastructure, and diversification, of course. So that does not mean this transformation will be easy for Armenia or linear, because in fact the greatest challenge for Armenia is probably internal rather than external. So the government is trying to change not only foreign policy, but also, as we can see, is trying political psychology of the economic structure of the country that developed over several decades. And also, And I would add the new program is built around Pashinyan's concept of real Armenia. So in particular terms, this means a greater focus on the international organized territory of the Republic of Armenia. So the state institutions on economic development of the country and the interests of citizens living inside the country. So the program, I think, identifies more peace, identifies more security for Armenia, for the whole region of South Caucasus, economic, not only in Armenia itself, but also in our region, infrastructure, education, also democracy, and other cases, other priorities.
Okay, and Elmira, border delimitation is particularly important because, I mean, unresolved borders have historically been a source of instability. How much work remains before the border itself stops being a potential source of tension?
When it comes to the borderline with Azerbaijan, with the delimitation process, for Azerbaijan, this is a very positive development because it the discussion between Armenia and Azerbaijan away from temporary crisis management and toward a longer-term policy framework. So, as we can see now, this is no longer presented as an agreement that Armenia has to sign under external pressure. It is increasingly being integrated into Armenia's own development strategy. So this is probably the most important transformation, and the argument is no longer only about the peace, not only about the delimitation processes. War is dangerous for the whole region. So the new argument is that without peace, Armenia cannot fully unblock its borders with other states, with Azerbaijan, with Turkey, and unlock its economy, diversity in trade routes and transport routes, etc., or becoming a part of more larger regional infrastructure network or the system.
Okay, and Elmira, the program also speaks about increasing contacts between Armenian and Azerbaijani civil society and business communities, and we have seen some steady momentum there. You'll remember a delegation from Armenia, a civil society delegation from Armenia did come to Baku, and there were discussions. Now, alongside, and this is all alongside bilateral trade. Now, could those people-to-people and commercial relationships prove as important as agreements between governments after decades of conflict?
Yes, of course, because after the summit of 8 August in Washington, first, even this program explicitly sets the consideration on institutionalization of peace agreement between civil society of Armenia and civil society of Azerbaijan as one of the objectives of the Armenian government for the period until 2031, if I'm not mistaken. It also includes the development of relations with Azerbaijan, with Turkey, alongside deeper cooperation with the European Union, also with the United States when it comes to the trade route and other international partners. So I think there is many opportunities for the both sides, and there were only 4 meetings between civil society of Armenia and Azerbaijan till nowadays, but we hope we will increase and enlarge the meetings between societies.
Elmira, thank you so much for joining us on the program today. I appreciate your contribution and analysis.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
And the United Kingdom and Azerbaijan are working to formalise their new strategic partnership. That's according to the newly appointed UK ambassador to Azerbaijan, Duncan Norman. The agreement will cover political, economic and defence ties between the two countries. Ambassador Norman also said the UK has strengthened defence cooperation with its first resident defence attaché in Azerbaijan since 2025.
It's a really important thing for the defence relationship. It's also, of course, very new. And like every new relationship, you have to start small and let it grow, and that's what we're doing. But we're already providing training opportunities in the UK. We're providing more looking at what help and support we can provide in country as well. And we're talking about how we might be able to help with, in the future, with equipment and supplies and those sort of things in the future. But it's new. but I think it's really exciting. And I think it's something that over the next 3 to 4 years will really grow. And I think I see it as one of the growth areas in our relationship during my time here.
An international conference is underway in Baku focusing on Belgium's colonial legacy in Central Africa and calls for reparations and historical justice. Chimnaz Shahlar is on the ground with the latest.
Colonialism is once again in the spotlight in Baku as an international conference on Belgium's colonial legacy and the fight for reparation is currently underway. Belgium's colonial rule left a deep and lasting impact on Central Africa. The Democratic Republic of Congo was under Belgian colonial rule for around 75 years, while Rwanda and Burundi were also administered by Belgium during the colonial periods. Today, decades after independence, questions of historical responsibility, recognition and reparative justice remain part of international discussions. Organized by the Baku Initiative Group, the conference brings together officials and experts from Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, Morocco and South Africa, as well as representatives from the United Nations. The focus is on Belgium's historical responsibility for the crimes committed during the colonial era, with participants discussing calls for an official apology, reparation and the restitution of cultural heritage. The conference is also addressing demand for greater access to Belgium's colonial archives, the return of human remains and historical artifacts, and the establishment of international mechanism to ensure reparations. Discussions are continuing here in Baku, with participants calling for historical justice and concrete steps toward addressing the legacy of Belgian colonial rule. I'm Chimnaz Shahlar with Zehrab Shirinov for A News.
Central Asia is stepping up efforts to expand its transport links, with billions of dollars being invested in new railways, roads and logistics hubs. The projects are also reshaping major trade routes between Asia and Europe, with Kazakhstan playing a central role. Fariza Kalimurzina has more.
Kazakhstan has become the biggest investor in transport projects among Central Asian countries. It accounts for 45% of all regional investment in roads and railways, around $32 billion. That's according to a new report by the Eurasian Development Bank. Overall, Central Asian countries are investing almost $72 billion in transport projects. The biggest share goes to railways, more than 42%. But countries across the region are also building and upgrading roads, logistics centers and border crossings. Kazakhstan's geography puts it right at the heart of many of these routes. Major transport links running through the country connect China with Russia and the South Caucasus, and that strengthens Kazakhstan's position as a key transit country between East and West. China remains the largest foreign investor in Central Asia's transport sector. According to the Eurasian Development Bank, Chinese investment exceeds $7 billion. And many of these projects are part of the Belt and Road Initiative. And looking ahead, the Eurasian Development Bank says these routes could become much better connected by 2035. And with its location, level of investment and growing transit role, Kazakhstan is expected to remain a key part of that development. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Uzbekistan and Georgia have introduced an electronic permit system for international road freight, replacing paper documents with digital permits. The move is expected to speed up procedures and make cross-border transport more transparent, with more than 60% of Uzbek road carriers currently using routes through Georgia. Sevil Rajapova reports from Tashkent.
Uzbekistan and Georgia have launched the e-permit system for international road freight. The system will allow carriers to receive transport permits electronically instead of using paper documents. It covers bilateral and transit transportation, as well as shipments to and from third countries. Uzbekistan's transport ministry says the digital system will reduce paperwork and the human factor, while helping prevent delays in the permit process. The change is particularly significant for Uzbek carriers, with over 60% of the country's road transport companies currently operating through Georgia. The electronic exchange of permits is expected to save time and provide carriers with a more transparent and convenient system. The agreement to introduce e-permit was signed during President Shavkat Mirziyoyev's visit to Georgia in early July. The two countries also agreed to expand discounts on rail freight and develop logistics infrastructure at Georgian seaports. The goal is to make the transport routes through Georgia more efficient and strengthen Uzbekistan's access to international trade corridors. Cyril Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
And that's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News.